Welcome to Empowering Plans, a show dedicated to identifying waste and undue expense in the health benefits industry, discovering ways to maximize benefits while minimizing costs, and empowering employers, administrators, and consultants to emphasize, once again, the benefit in benefit planning. Today's episode is brought to you by the Phia Group, empowering plans since 1999. Now here are your hosts, the Phia Group's own CEO, Adam Russo, and Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Ron Peck.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great day here at Phia Group. For our podcast today, we're really excited. With me, as always, is my co-host, Ron Peck. Say hello, Ron.
Hello, Ron.
And today, for the first time, we have a special guest. Ron, we've never shared the mic with anybody. What do you think?
I'm very uncomfortable.
But we felt today we had to bring an expert on. I mean, for the past few weeks, everyone's been seeing what's going on or not going on in Washington. Obviously, all the health care changes, all the proposals, Obamacare, Trump care, Ryan care, whatever you want to call it. So we said, you know what? Today, we decided, let's bring in Brady Bizarro. For any of you who've been listening to our webinars over the past few months, you realize that he is now a featured guest on every webinar. He is our Washington, D.C. insider. He loves this stuff. I mean, he has a passion for this. I'm actually surprised that he works here, Ron. I don't get it.
Election day was his Super Bowl.
I mean, he would write emails to the staff telling everyone it was their civic duty to leave work and go back to their hometown and vote.
He's like that bald eagle in the Muppet Show.
Right. So for everybody, just so you know, Brady Bizarro, he joined us as an attorney in early 2016. He does a lot of regulatory, transactional, and compliance matters related to the healthcare industry as a whole, particularly self-funded ERISA plans, as well as municipalities, et cetera. He knows everything there is to know about the AHCA, HIPAA, the Privacy Act, basically anything related to health insurance, healthcare, and the laws and the politics surrounding them. He's our expert. He earned his BA from BU, magna cum laude, huh? That's pretty impressive. What is that, like
buddy, huh?
That's like a 2.5 GPA or something. And he got his law degree from BU as well. And while he was at BU, he was a note editor for the International Law Journal and worked as a summer associate at Green LLP, a civic litigation firm here in Boston, where he specialized in healthcare fraud. Ron, we know all about that here at Phia. But let's start off with the first question. Ron, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. I think I can encapsulate everybody's thoughts on the matter by asking what the heck is going on. 1 second, we're talking about new laws. Now we're talking about changing existing laws. But no, we're actually going to introduce new laws. It seems like a game of tennis going back and forth. I don't know what's going to happen. It's chaotic. Can you get a read on where we are at this point?
Yeah, so I think I can, and just what a crazy turn of events. I mean, we had, even at Phia, we were watching the developments sort of minute by minute where was the vote going to happen, was the bill brought to the floor, and then we heard there may have been a holdup, it was rescheduled, and then the whole thing just tanked, and it was a surprise to everyone. And I think, and I'm not the only one, of course, who's talking about this, but the problem with the bill is that it was a bad bill, right? It was trying to satisfy too many different people at one time. Healthcare affects 1/5 of our economy, so getting this right is very important. And when you're trying to satisfy different branches of the Republican Party, some of which wanted the ACA fully repealed and others who really wanted, a lot of the protections kept in place, what you ended up with was a bill that didn't really accomplish much of anything. And on top of that, you add in the bad report you got from the Congressional Budget Office where they projected 24 million people would lose coverage over 10 years. It looked really bad for many members to have to go back to their districts and explain why they're voting for this kind of bill. And so I think that's why it didn't pass. That said, there are a lot of things now that we can watch for going forward. A lot of things the administration can still do to impact the ACA from a regulatory standpoint. And so that's what's been in the news lately. The president's been tweeting about, actually he tweeted it last week that, quote, "We're all going to make a deal on health care. That's such an easy one." So we'll see what eventually happens and what he has in store. But a lot of experts think that what the administration will look to do now is really utilize HHS and the agency's powers on a number of fronts to perhaps weaken the ACA. The president said that it's a law that's going to, quote, explode. And, he's right. If it's not fixed, it's going to explode.
Question. With the HHS, are you talking about tweaking the ACA? Because obviously that's not a full repeal. It seems like that you're talking that's probably the road they're going on.
Yeah, I mean, so they can't do much from a legislative point of view, obviously, without passing a bill. And so this is really just the discretionary actions of Tom Price, who is the current secretary of HHS. So this would be things like blocking the funding for the subsidies under the ACA, which is a big deal. If people who are low income who have been getting these subsidies now find they can't get the subsidies, well, then they're not going to be helped under the bill. They could also refuse to enforce the individual mandate. And we've seen that already with the IRS coming out and saying that they weren't going to require you to list on your tax return whether or not you had coverage. And as we know, if the individual mandate's not enforced, then it's going to cost insurers a lot more to cover people that have high dollar claims going forward.
I think it really is this almost political tug of war where if you take proactive action from a regulatory standpoint to weaken the law, people are going to point at you and say, maybe the law would have worked but for your sabotage of the law. And then on the flip side, if you take action to improve the law and have it work better, people are going to say the opposite, which is that, what are you doing? You're basically taking the legacy of our enemy and making him look like gold. At the same time, what I think is so funny and kind of what I guess the position that we find ourselves in today, think about this. When the ACA was passed years and years ago, we had a webinar and we discussed the fact that so much of the law basically punted decision-making authority and said, the secretary of this department will make this decision later. The secretary of that department will make this decision later, and left it wide open. You know, was that maybe short-sighted, that maybe people didn't think that an administration that opposed the administration drafting the law would eventually be put in a place where they could put into those secretary seats somebody who could potentially sink the law? That's just something that I'm thinking might have been short-sighted.
Yeah, I think the Democrats would be kicking themselves now if they had seen, if they had known now what happened then, which was essentially, as you said, with the HHS secretary being given discretionary authority to say, well, I don't want to interpret these, for example, the EHBs, the essential health benefits. Originally in the ACA, that the delegation of authority to define those was given by HHS to the states. They said, well, I'm going to punt this, you come up with it. But now, he can go back and say, well, I'm going to actually redefine what those essential health benefits mean going forward. So, yeah, there's a lot of areas where if the administration wants to, they could tank this bill. They could, quote, let it explode. That's why I don't think that's going to happen. I think there'd be too much blame to go around. I do think that we'll see a patchwork temporarily while discussions are ongoing.
So the bottom line, though, is if there are tweaks to the system to make the ACA work better, won't those far-right Republicans be against any of this just because, as Ron was talking about prior to this, it's going to make Obamacare look better from a historical standpoint? If they tweak it and it starts to work and the prices and the premiums go down, then the Democrats win, right? Versus more than showing that the Republicans made it work. From a legacy standpoint, wouldn't it look more as Obama got it right?
They're really playing two battles here. They've got, if they try to patch up the law, then the Democrats win from their point of view at least, and that the bill will ostensibly will continue on covering people, and it'll go on for a number of years and get further ingrained in our system. On the other hand, if the law explodes, you'll have a bunch of people who are upset. So I think what the play is here is just in the interim, they're going to have HHS enact a number of regulations, or at least interpret them in certain ways to just temporarily patch over the markets. And in the meantime, there's a lot of talk lately about another plan. And so the president has been meeting with people from the Freedom Caucus, who is a conservative wing of the party, trying to come up with new ideas about what they want to do. He went golfing with Senator Rand Paul just this past weekend, and he tweeted out how we're going to make great progress, and that there's still discussions going on. And so we think, there's going to be some action in the next few weeks on this. I think the whole idea that the ACA is going to stay and that the repeal and replace is dead, I think we're going to see repeal and replace revived in a way going forward.
So I have an important question. And I go to a lot of conferences, as you all know, and I hear these experts, so-called experts, talk about what's going to happen in D.C. But here's my question. We're a self-funded employer here at Phia. We represent millions of lives that are self-funded all across the country, employer-based health care plans. What's going to happen to the employer-based healthcare system? How's any of this, or will any of this, really affect self-funding, in your opinion, Brady?
Yeah, so I think that is an open question. So there's two big areas I think of here. One is, what will be the enforcement of existing provisions of the ACA? What requirements will change? And as of now, I believe it was last week I saw an interview with Secretary Price in which he said that, hey, as of now, the ACA is the law of the land. So we're going to keep enforcing the provisions that require you to report certain things, or certain coverage requirements, that's still the law. So we would advise our clients still to follow the ACA until further notice. But there are things that could happen. There has not been talk lately, at least, of repealing the employer mandate, but as you know, that's one thing that could affect us significantly if they were to remove that. But that's been taken off the table as of now.
So as a follow-up, if you had to make a call, heads or tails, you're in Vegas, you're putting money on the table, what do you think's going to happen?
I think so. There's a couple big key dates to watch. I mean, the first thing to note is that the legislative calendar is pretty packed. And so things have to happen quickly here. I mean, President Trump wants to move on to tax reform. They've got to pass a budget, and they've got to nominate confirm a Supreme Court nominee. So there's a lot of things that have to happen very quickly. I think you'll see by sometime in June, if there's going to be a new bill or pieces of a bill, I think that's when you'll see it happen, because the date is June 21st. That's the day that most insurers have. That's a deadline that's been set by states by which they have to set their rates for the next year's coverage.
So this is a market issue now. So you're saying by June, all the large carriers have to make the decision whether they want to still partner with the ACA, if they want to keep this thing going. Yeah. So your belief is that the market itself will push these politicians to have to do something.
I think so, yeah. I think by the end of June, that's what you'll see. At least for the federal marketplace, that's the date. June 21st is when states requiring insurers to submit their new rates. And how can you do that if you don't know what's going to be changed or not? So I think that's a date to watch.
So something's going to happen by June. Brady's not really telling us what's going to happen, even though that's what we asked him. But something will happen by June. Ron?
I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everything we've seen thus far still relates to the matter of providing people with health benefits coverage. I won't say health insurance because there are alternatives, Medicaid expansion, things like that, but ultimately we're talking about health benefits coverage. Am I right in believing that we haven't really seen anything new regarding addressing the actual cost of care?
We talk about this all the time in all of our webinars and presentations. We say, what is the underlying problem with health insurance or health care costs in this country? No one's addressing the provider side. No one's addressing the cost of specialty drugs. And that bill, I think the one that failed didn't do that. And I'm not seeing discussions that are going to address that going forward, unfortunately, at this point.
I would have to agree with both of you. And what I truly believe is that the market will make the correction, as in everything else. The reality is this: as long as insurance companies are losing money on the exchanges, or they have to have double-digit premium increases, something's going to have to change, and it's going to be the insurance companies that are going to make that happen or force the hand of the politicians. But you're right. The bottom line is, we just did a blog post, I believe, today or yesterday. Sorry for that self-promotion on our blog, but go to fiagroup.com and you can check it out. At the end of the day, there's a very simple way to solve all this. And I talk about it all the time. Ron, you talk about it all the time. Lowering the actual cost of care. Two main culprits. You could talk about dialysis, you could talk about air ambulance, but at the end of the day, it's hospital charges and pharmaceutical drugs. Those two areas. If you would literally just pass legislation saying that, hey, all you hospitals out there, what you're charging is ridiculous. You have to have a reasonable standard in regards to how you're pricing your stays, your inpatient stays, your outpatient stays. Have a reasonable standard, one. And two, an MS drug that cost $30 15 years ago shouldn't cost $30,000 today if it's the same drug. It's not like a volume 2 or version 2. It's not like the iPhone 7.0. It's the same exact phone. And the point is, here's the problem. And all the folks back home have to understand this. In most parts of this country, the hospital or the hospital system is the largest employer in that area. You can't expect your legislators, you can't expect your politicians to go home and talk badly about the largest employer in their district. You'd be saying to them, hey, cut waste, reduce staff. All you're doing is trying to find ways to actually hurt your local economy. That's why, from a cost standpoint, none of these politicians will ever do that, because it's going to be hurting their own districts. And who gives these guys the money for their campaigns? These are the contributors, the lobbyists, the drug manufacturers, the pharmaceutical lobbyists. All these folks are throwing the money in D.C. They're what keep these politicians in business. Attacking the very entities that feed you every day is not going to happen. So I feel that all these things they're doing in D.C., unless they actually tackle the cost issue, which I don't see anyone doing, I don't think any of this is going to change. And why you need to contact us, because we are willing to fight that fight on those bills, because the politicians in D.C. aren't.
Speaking of opportunities to hear some of the new things that we're doing and some of the new ideas that we're throwing around, we're actually going to be having our next webinar on April 27th. If you're listening to this recording before April 27th, be sure to sign up and tune in live. If you're listening to this podcast after April 27th, look at a calendar to know for sure. All of our webinars, like the podcast, are recorded and available for download on our website, so it's not too late to enjoy. And also sign up for the next live webinar. Adam, I don't know if you want to tell the folks a little bit about what we're going to be talking about on our next webinar.
Sure, that'd be great, Ron. So at the next webinar, we're going to talk about your plan documents themselves and also doing a gap review, checking your plan doc versus your actual employee handbook. Is there something covered in the handbook that you're offering your employees that's not covered under the actual plan? It's a big issue. We're going to focus on that entirely for that hour. But I want to also make sure people know to visit us on social media, because Brady does a lot of posts there. Hey, Brady, we want to thank you for joining us today. Any last thoughts on what's happening in D.C. or any other predictions you want to finally make?
Wow, I mean, it's always tough to know what's going to happen in D.C. As you mentioned, politics, it can be tricky, right? You've got people, lobbyists involved and different competing things. I think we're going to see a piece-by-piece enactment of a replacement bill. That's what I'm going to predict. My bold prediction will be that.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Brady gave us that prediction, piece by piece. Very nice. Folks, thank you so much for tuning into our podcast. On behalf of Brady, thank you for joining us. Ron, Peck, and myself, come visit us at the Phia Group, phiagroup.com anytime. Thank you, and have a great day.